Hi, Leroy here. Today we're going to talk about using samples on a tone track. There are lots of differences depending on which track you put a sample on, and there are lots of settings. We're going to talk about those today. Last time we talked about the difference between triggers and gates, and we talked about envelopes. We're going to be touching on that a little bit today, but we're also going to add the difference between monophonic and polyphonic sounds. So I've loaded up a wave file. It's just a sawtooth wave. It's 30 seconds. It's mono. Loaded it up inside Instrument 1 track. Again, to do that, to load up a wave file inside a tone track, to make a tone track, you can hit clear and then hold down clear and push what track you want to clear, and then tell it you want to create a tone track. Then you can hit the value knob and scroll down to wave file. Right? You can scroll down to wave file, and then go to whatever folder you want, whatever folder you have wave files in, and then scroll down to the file you want, hit the value knob, it'll load it in. That's what I've done here. Like I said, this is just 30 seconds mono. It's a sawtooth at A440, so it sounds like this. So one thing to notice on the Instrument 1 track, this is a gated track. So as long as you hold it down, it's going to keep playing that sound for as long as the sound is. So in this case, it's 30 seconds long, so you can hold it down for 30 seconds. If you hold it down for longer than 30 seconds, it's just going to either start over or it's going to just stop, depending on settings you have. So this is gated, which is great. So if you hit notes, it'll play it as long as you hold down your finger on the note, and it's also polyphonic. You can play more than one note at a time, so check this out. It's playing all of the notes you press all at the same time. Let's talk a bit about how samples work to give us an idea of how this pitch shifting is working, because it's taking this one file and it's changing the sound. It's changing the pitch of the sound. What is it doing? How does it work? Most of us are probably old enough to remember records and tapes. And if you had a record and played it at the wrong speed, it would be faster and higher, or it would be slower and lower. That's how these are working. Remember, when we're listening to a sound, like this file is just a single sawtooth wave. It's playing back 440 times a second. That's what we hear is this pitch. If we doubled how many times that was playing, if instead of 440 hertz, we moved it to 880 hertz, if we double that, that makes it an octave higher. It's the same note. These are both A's, but one is an octave higher. That's how sound works. If you made it play half as fast, instead of 440 times a second, 220 times a second, we'll go down an octave here. It's going to sound an octave lower. Here's the original, octave lower. So when we're looking at these sampled files, the sampler works in pretty much the same way a record player or a tape player would work. If you speed it up, it's going to sound higher and it's going to be shorter. And if you slow it down, it's going to play for longer, but it's going to be lower. So for instance, this is a 30-second file. If we go up an octave, it'll only be 15 seconds. If we go up another octave, it'll be 7.5 seconds. Then it's going to be 4 and what, a quarter seconds, something like that, all the way up here. Same thing if we go down. If we're here at 0, that's 30 seconds. If we go down an octave, it would be a minute long. Another octave, 2 minutes long. Okay? That is how this works. It does have a couple of different side effects. One of them is you lose fidelity as you go down in octaves because there's not as much information to play back. So it can start sounding a little lo-fi, right? Also, you kind of lose transients. Transients are these sharp attacks, like in a snare drum. It might be ch, 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 right? This really sharp attack. If you go up an octave, it's going to be shorter. But if you go down a couple of octaves, instead of having that sharp hit on a drum, it's going to stretch it out, kind of like boom, right? You lose these sharp attacks. That's one of the differences between using a sampled sound and using a synthesized sound. Typically with synthesized sounds, things like those attacks are maintained because you're making the sound from scratch. This is using one sound file and just stretching it and pushing it and squeezing it to make it fit different time and different pitches. Also of note, things that are synced to your tempo, like if you have a synced delay or reverb or LFO, or someone just, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, when you change the pitch, it changes the timing as well. If you go up or down an octave, you're just doubling and halving the timing. That's fine. It works pretty well. But if you go like from here to here, it's gonna be way off. It's not gonna be even close. It's because it divides this, this whole octave up into basically 12 steps, right? So the timing is going to be all messed up. Anyway, so those are some things to think about when you're using this. When you're using the sampling engine on most samplers, that's how it's working. To make something higher, it makes it faster. To make it lower, it makes it slower. The instrument tracks here, we're going to look at 1 and 2. They're exactly the same. Now, I've loaded a different file on each. I've loaded the 30-second mono on instrument 1 and the 30-second mono 24-bit on 2. We were talking about that a bit last time, maybe 2 videos ago. I think internally it's converting all the sounds to a 16-bit file. And these 2 tracks treat samples exactly the same way, so they sound exactly the same. Check this out. And they sound the same because I believe internally it's converting them to the same format. It could be 24-bit, it could be 16-bit. I think, based on what I've seen, it's converting these to 16-bit files, but it could be converting them to 24-bit. It wouldn't change much. But notice the sound is exactly the same. There is no difference on these tracks. These tracks are both polyphonic. Both of them are polyphonic. Both of them are gates. So as long as you hold down a key, it's going to play and it's going to stop when you let go. That's the instrument tracks. By default, that's how they're loaded. Let's look at this bass track, also a melodic track, but the bass track treats the track differently when you load in a sample. Let's go to it now. I haven't changed anything. It's the same file, 30-second mono. Let's play the same note down here. Whoa, that's low. What happened? Why is it so low? So by default, the bass track lowers your track down several octaves. You hold down Shift and go. It lowers it down by 3 octaves. I'm having to push octave up here. I'm holding down Shift and then pushing octave plus. So it's moving it up an octave. So I go back down to show you it's -3. By default, it loads the bass track to -3 octaves, 3 octaves down because it's a low part. It's a bass. That's what it assumes you're going to use it as. So let's move it up 3 octaves to octave 0. There we go. This is also a gate, right? You can hold it down. But there's something different. Why does the sound different? It's a little bit muffled. Listen, here's the instrument 1, instrument 2, here's the bass. Muffled, what's it doing? Okay, so by default, there is something else going on in this bass track. Before we go there, let's look at some of the options we have. If we hold down Shift and push the track, these are the tracks, or the track options we'll have for every track. Notice it says track, general. So these are track settings. The bass track, if you set it to a tone track or a kit track, it's going to be that in every section. This is for every section altogether. It's the level. So if you change this here and go to section 2, this level is going to be the same in every single section. If you change it in, section 12, it's going to change it in section 1, 2, as well. So these are all just general options for the track specifically. There's nothing we can do with the sample here. This is for the EQ. Notice it says EQ. This is the compression settings, MIDI settings. Again, this is all for the track, for every single section and clip in this track. So there's not much we can do there. So if you want to deal with samples, you got to go to Section Select, be on the track you want, hit Edit, and then push the section we're working with. Right now we're working in Section 1, so we're just going to look at Section 1. So first we have the clip settings. Now in clip settings, by default, the mix level is 127. That's the highest it can be. That's fine. Notice we have pan, delay, reverb. This is all stuff for this one specific clip on the track. So if you go to section 2, it'll be clip 2. It'll be different settings. You can set these clip settings different in every section, every clip. And then the length, the mode, quantize, transposing, octaves, all this stuff, scales, stuff that's not really useful to us specifically for sampling. It is useful, but we've looked at it before, and it's not useful for the samples specifically. If we go to tone settings, this is where we're going to get some options we can change. So first of all, notice the level. That's for this specific sound. In every clip, every section, if you have a tone, if a track is set to a tone, it's for every clip, every section. So if clip 1 on the bass track is a tone track, every clip has to be a tone track. But for this specific tone, for this clip, you're setting the level. You can change that if you change the tone. If it's a different tone in clip 2, you can change that. So you can make it louder if you want to, or softer. That'll adjust the volume for sure. Going down, we also have pan and delay and reverb. Again, this is just for this specific tone, this specific track and clip. Okay, so here's some of the things we're getting to now. So this is what we need. Cutoff. It says cutoff 0, but by default, within this tone, it has cutoff. Now, if we hit note, go back to note mode over here, hit note, it's going to keep we're still in this menu, so we can change options in the menu and still be in the note mode, so we can play notes. So what it does is, by default, in this tone, it changes the cutoff, the filter. So if we open this up, we'll hear it change. Listen carefully. Hear it open up? It's kind of muffled. Now it's open. If we open up the filter, it's going to sound the same as instrument 1. See that? By default, a bass is a low sound and you want to chop off those highs. So by default, knowing that it's a bass track, the Verselab puts on a filter and it makes it monophonic, which we'll look at in a second, and adds one more thing, which we'll look at. Okay, anyway, so, also lowers it down 3 octaves. It's like, oh yeah, it's going to be a low sound, lower it down 3 octaves, put on a filter to filter off the highs, and here's other stuff we're doing. So it is still gated, which is good. We can hold down the note, and it'll keep playing as long as the sample is there, still as long as there's more sample, as long as you hold down your finger. But it's also monophonic, which means it only plays one note at a time. You don't typically want your bass notes to be chords or stepping on each other, so watch. You can't do chords. Here, right? You can do multiple notes at a time, they'll all play. On a bass track, you can't, because it's assuming you're doing a bass part, which is monophonic by default. So we can change that again. Go to section select over here, section select, and edit section 1 for now. It's in tone settings. So if we go to there, mono poly, see tone by default, this tone track is the bass track is going to be monophonic. It's the same as if you just set it to mono here. Okay? Same thing. But if you set it to poly is your other option, then it's going to be polyphonic. Okay, so you can change that, but by default, it's going to be these things. So if you're looking to make a tone track, and use a sample, pick the track that fits best so you have to do less work, right? Anyway, let's put it back to mono for now, because I want to show you one more setting that is on the bass by default. You may have noticed there's this sliding sound when you're going between notes. Listen. It's like sliding around between the notes, right? That's called portamento, or on some synths it's called glide, and it's taking one note and then sliding into the next note. I'm not really, I don't really use that very often, even in bass patches, but that's there by default on the bass track. So how do we change that? Same way we change this in the tone settings. We're gonna go down to portamento. See, by tone, again, it's selecting the default for this tone track on the bass track. We can set it to on, off, or tone. So on is what it's at, right? It's on tone now, but tone is on for this track. Again, sliding around. If we turn it off, right? It goes directly to the note, no stopping in between, no sliding. Turn it on, it'll slide again. And if you turn portamento on, the next option in tone settings is, porta time. Again, by default, this is set in the tone to be a certain time, but you can set how long you want that to be. So if we turn it down, it's like turning it off. It's at 0. We can set it up though, and it takes a long time to slide around, right? The lower this number is, the faster it'll slide between notes. The higher it is, the longer time it'll take to slide between notes. Okay, so that's portamento. Again, you can turn that off by turning the porta time to 0, or by turning portamento off. And if we want, again, to make this polyphonic, we can go into mono poly, change it to poly. Now we got the same as the instrument tracks, the other instrument tracks, instrument 1 and 2, okay? So that's the difference between bass and instrument 1 and 2. Now, let's look at the drum tracks. There are also 2 ways of these drum tracks. Notice it says drum tracks up here, right? These treat tones differently as well. While here, by default, we have polyphonic sounds and they're gates, so you can just hold down as long as you want. These 3 tracks, kick, snare, and hi-hat, by default, these are triggers. Watch. You hit it once, and it plays through the envelope. Again, like we discussed in the last one, you can change the envelope. If you missed the last video, check out the last video for the envelopes. You can set the envelope in the section select, but by default, it doesn't matter how long you hold down the note, it's going to go through the envelope no matter how long you hold down this button. And it's monophonic, so you can only play one note at a time, but you hit it once, it goes through the envelope. That's why it's sustaining. You can stop this by hitting Shift play, just to stop it from playing. All three of these work exactly the same way. They're monophonic and they're triggers instead of gates. So it just runs through the shape of the envelope. That you can't change. So these three tracks are going to be triggers in the drum tracks, and in the melodic tracks, these three are going to be gates. That you cannot change, period. So if you want something that's a gate, where if you hold down your finger, it'll stay playing as long as you hold down your finger, you need to select a melodic track. You can still edit the envelope on the melodic track, but you can't make the melodic track a trigger, and you can't make the drum tracks a gate. Keep that in mind because that is very important. You can, however, change everything else in these drum tracks. So if you want it to be polyphonic instead, you can go to section select, you're on the kick track, hit the section you want to, or the edit in the selection the section you want to edit, go to tone settings, and you can change it from tone to poly. Boom. But again, it's still a trigger. So you just hit these once. It's playing them all until it gets done with the envelope, okay? So that's these tracks. Apart from that, they're exactly the same as these. They don't have a cutoff like the bass does. They work more like instrument tracks in that way. They can be polyphonic, but they will definitely be triggers, not gates like these ones. There is also, if you have an external MIDI controller hooked up, the instrument tracks, the instrument 1 and 2, they have aftertouch setting of vibrato. So if you go to instrument 1, for instance, are we on there on this? No, we're not here. Okay, so on my MIDI controller off screen, hear that? Wah, 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 wah. That sound that it makes, that's when I push down the key extra, the aftertouch setting. I can control that myself. That's what aftertouch does on these tracks. You can't change that as far as I know. On the bass, I think it does something with the filter, and on these tracks, snare and hi-hat, it does something with the filter as well, but it's hard to tell because it's an envelope, and I don't think it does anything on kick. I don't know if you're going to use that or not, but again, if you want to have that vibrato and have that controlled with aftertouch, if you can do that, use one of these tracks because you can't change that. Last one, kit track. This one's a little different. The volume level is higher, and there's no way to change that. No way to change that behavior by default. You can make it softer or louder, but listen. So it has a little bit of release by default. And it's loud. I don't know why. I've checked every setting. I don't think it's something you change. I think it's something in the track. You can make it less loud by holding shift and changing the track level maybe. Or you can change the clip level or the tone level, right? But by default, this is going to be louder, even though the settings are all the same. So that's one thing, the kit track. Also, it's got that release, so you could change that inside the envelope settings under section select, edit, the tone settings. It may also have a little bit of reverb. It's hard to tell. But there are some settings that are a little bit different inside the tone on the kit. But it is also polyphonic. And it's a gate. But it just has a little bit of release at the end. So when you let go, it has a little bit of a tail. Unlike the instruments, which just cuts right off. Again, you could adjust the envelope on either of these to make them sound the same. You could make the kit sound like the instruments or the instruments sound like the kit. That can be changed. But just like with these drum tracks where you can't change these from trigger to gate, this is a gate. You can't change this from gate to trigger. So this is always going to be a gate just like the instrument tracks are. Okay, one more thing we want to look at with using samples. We're going to go to the synth and we're going to record in a short sample. Let me turn this down just a bit for now because it's going to be a little loud. We're going to record, I've recorded lots of samples. When I record samples for the Verselab specifically, I typically record them at C to make it easier to use on the Verselab because by default, the Verselab is going to put every sample on C. Doesn't matter what key you're in on the Verselab, doesn't matter what settings you have on the Verselab, it's always going to put your sample on C4. So let's see how that works. We're going to record in a G. So let's just, I have this set to line in for the input, mic in, offline. So this is the line setting. Mic in is off and it's the line, right? So we're recording in line in and we're using the negative 24 decibels as the trigger. So over here on the synth, we're just going to record in this G for just a few seconds, okay? So I'm going to put this back over here. And again, here's the G. That's what we're going to record. So let's go ahead and put this in standby and record a few seconds of that. It's just going to wait now until it hears the sound, which is nice. We're using the negative 24 decibels. We'll record about 5 seconds of this, just so we have something for this to work with. There we go. Now we can listen to it back by pushing load. Great. We're not even going to normalize it now. We could normalize it. We could set the start and end. We could export the sample if we wanted to. We talked about all of this stuff in the last video. We won't talk about it now, but we just want to put it on. Let's put it on instrument 1 for now, okay? Put it on instrument 1, set the sample, yes, imports it, and then we're just going to hit exit to get out of the sampling section. Now in instrument 1, we have that sound. Now, this is C4 by default, right? We're just in the default settings. So if we go to edit note, we're in the key of C and we're in chromatic mode. So this is C. Notice that's G. That note is G. That's the note we recorded, but it's putting it on C. So how do we change that? Not that hard. Just remember, every sample that comes in is going to be on C. And a lot of times when you purchase samples, they'll be labeled with exactly what octave and note that they were sampled at. Like, for instance, this was G4. So I'd put in the file name G4, so I knew, what the note was. If it's not that way, you can figure it out by listening, right? But anyway, to change that, we're going to go to section select over here, section select, and then we go to edit, hit the section we're in, and we scroll down to sample edit, okay? Sample edit, we scroll all the way to the bottom. Notice it says key C4. While we're in these menus, in the section select portion, we can go back to note mode and it will stay in the menu until we exit. So we can play keys now. We can play notes and check things while we're in this menu changing things, which is nice. Anyway, so this was a G4. That's the note. Right, that's when we recorded, but it's on C now because it puts it by default on C4. There's no way to change that. It's going to go into C4 when you load it in. Doesn't matter what key you're in again. So all we have to do is tell this we want it at G4. Now notice when we change this, it's on C4 now. Now we're telling it put it on C#4. Now we're telling it put it on D4, right? We're telling it what note to put it on. What note is this sampled at? So this is G4. There it is, G. Here's the G on the keyboard. Here's the G sample. It's the same now. So now this is C. Here's C on the keyboard. Here's C an octave up on the keyboard. Right? So now we've got it correct. Now it's on G4 and it was recorded at G4. So now it sounds right. We can hit exit over here. Exit. Yay! Now it works. So that's the last thing you have to know. If you're loading in a sample, it's going to put it on C4 no matter what. If it was recorded at B flat or G sharp or whatever it was recorded at, it's going to be on the pad C4. So you're probably going to have to change that unless your samples are recorded at C4. I have made a sample pack with my micro freak over here. I've recorded all of the samples on a C to make it easy to use on the Verselab. They're in different octaves, C3, C4, C5. That's the octave. I will put a link down below in the description to that sample pack. If you want to take a look, you can load it right in your Verselab and use it. It is free. Enjoy. Anyway, I hope that you've learned something about this today, about sampling on the tone tracks, using the drum tracks, the melodic tracks. It is different depending on which one you choose. Just as reference again, instrument 1 and 2 are going to be polyphonic, and they're going to be gates. So as long as you hold down your finger, it's going to play through the sample, as long as there's more sample to play. The bass track is going to be monophonic, down 3 octaves, and it's going to have portamento. These 3 drum tracks are going to be monophonic, and they're going to be triggers. So you tap the pad once, and it's going to play through the envelope. So you can adjust how it sounds on the envelope, but holding down your finger is not going to matter. The kit track, for some reason, is louder. Oh, the bass track also has the cutoff, right? It's got the filter closed a little bit. The kit track, I'm not sure why, but it's louder. Something in this, this track is louder and harsher for some reason that I can't change. It's also polyphonic and has a little bit of release on each of the keys. It's also a gate, which is nice. Anyway, so those are the differences. I hope that was helpful to you. There should be more videos coming soon. I hope you get out there and make something interesting. Again, this has been Leroy. Have a great day. Make something nice. Bye, guys.